So the last thing I have to report, this may take a little bit, and it's spurred. I'm going to blame Mr. Hoyt on this one. So when we talked about our budget thing last time around, we're talking mill levy, we're talking tax increases, and how those things work. And I think there's always some frustration about how it's viewed by different entities along the way, and try how to make this make sense to people. Also, revenue neutral mailings went out. I received mine yesterday at home. So I think that's still confusing to understand. So being able to, what I'm going to try to do is teach a little bit. I use Teach Econ. So I'm going to teach this at the very basic level that I possibly can. And I'm doing that for my good as well as your good. So I'm going to use a teaching method called over exaggeration. 4 points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a community. And let's say this community is our entire district. So there's nothing that exists outside of this within our district. We all know that's not true. But what I'm going to show you is kind of how it works for people within that district. So I just have a portion of our district. This is up in the Grand Mirror area. So I cut out a square. There's 13 houses in that square, and there's 5 empty lots that could be built upon. So for example, I'm going to treat all those houses like they were put in by the same builder and cost the same amount of money and got put into play. So I know they're not, but today we're going to pretend like all of these houses are the same, they're worth the same amount, and people went into them at about the same time. So I'm going to say that is $300,000. So I'm going to say these houses were bought and paid for $300,000. 13 families moved in, and we still have 5 empty lots in that neighborhood. That is not too far off our district average. I want to say district average, or the district average price for us was around the 275 range. So this is me working in round numbers, adding up. So rounding up into clear numbers. So this is our community. This is our district. This is where we're at. So and these are actual numbers. If I can get it to move. Come on, work for me. All right. I can't make that any bigger. But so I'm going to tell you guys, we levied around 60 mills last year. I think it was slightly over 60 mills. So we took that 60 mills, and for those $300,000 houses, their school district assessment is going to be just slightly under $1,900. So $1,897.50. You'll see, because they're all valued the same, they all pay that same amount of tax on that 60 mills. And this is kind of how it works on our end. So you'll see down at the bottom is $25,357.50. So you add all those 13 houses plus the 5 lots together on what the 5 lots generate, which is a lot less. So $138 on those houses, or on those lots, gives us the $25,357. Sorry, Christine. I'm going to need my mic so I can't move. So if I highlight that, and that would be we're going to call that our revenue neutral rate. Okay, so that $25,000 and change is going to come up again when we talk about revenue neutral rate. But we're going to pretend that's what we did last year, because we were 60 mills last year. But now we're talking about what we're going to do with the budget. And remember, our budget has a lot to do with student counts, valuation, and how those things interact. We don't have a lot of control over that formula. That all comes to us through KSDE. So, and it's always a year behind. If you guys don't know, the percentages we have to go off of, or what KSDE, what they do is they take the number of students we have divided by our valuation, and you get valuation per pupil. You go on a list, and the lists have different percentages on how you go rank order. So if we move up on that rank order and our valuation per pupil is higher, we get a less of a percentage from the state. Does that make sense? If we go down, where our valuation per pupil is lower and we get ranked down in that, we will get more assistance because our value per pupil goes down. So I'm going to leave that there, but we're going to talk about our 60 mills. This is where we're at. So you guys asked me, okay, what Mr. Hoyt asked me was, what does that do to my taxes when we change something? So I'm going to show you guys some different things that can happen, what happens to people's values, what those revenue neutral things that are getting fall under different circumstances. So here's just a change of it. So I'm going to move to the next one, and we're going to reduce it a mill. So we're going to take that mill levy, and we can do something along the way, and we can reduce that 60 mills to 59 mills. In the school district's perspective, this is a decrease in taxes. And for these families in these $300,000 houses, that those values have not changed, what happens to the amount of taxes they pay when you drop it from 60 to 59? You'll see it go down about 2%. So instead of collecting that $25,300 in change, we're going to collect $24,891.75 because nothing changed. All right, we're going to go to the flip side because we got to have that conversation. We got to talk about going the other way. So we're going to talk about 61. So what does a 1 mil increase do? So you take your $1,897 that you have, you add 1 mil, and that takes you up to $1,932. So you're increasing 2%. So 1 mil takes you up, 1 mil or 1 mil down can take you down 2% on this example. Remember, our values have not changed. What we know is values in our community always changes. So what can make your community change? So I'm going to go back to my houses again. I'm going to say house number 1. You guys can pick which house is house number 1 because it doesn't matter. You remember they're all worth, everybody's $300,000. But you got the one guy in your neighborhood, one person in your neighborhood, one family in your neighborhood that they're going to put a big addition on the back, and they're going to increase their value of their home $50,000. Okay, so you got one house worth $350,000 because they added something on. So they went and they got a permit that says we're going to add on to this thing. It's going to be about this much value. They turn the paperwork into the the city, not the police. They don't pay attention to that. So they're turning that in because you fill out those permits so the tax assessor can make sure they don't want you to get by with that without doing that. So you're increasing the value of your house along the way. The other way you can see is, you see those two, the empty lots. I'm going to put 2 houses on those lots. So now instead of 13 houses, we're going to have 15 houses. And they're all $300,000 except for one. One house is going up to $350,000. So Greg's house. All right. So my 60 mills, we go back to where we were at the very, very beginning of things. Is everybody was the same, but now we have one house that put a $50,000 addition. So it's valued higher along the way according to how it works on your assessed value for your taxes. So that house is going to go from their 1897, which everybody else stays the same at 60 mills, and they're going to go up to $2,242.50. I'm going to call this growth, is what I'm going to call it. This is people choosing to raise their own taxes, pretty much, because I'm adding something onto my home. I'm doing something. Maybe they're putting a pool in, maybe they're putting a pickleball court in, maybe I don't know what they're doing along the way, but they wanted to do something to their home to increase that value along the way. Everybody else stays the same. Then we get to those 2 that change from a $138 lot to an $1,800 or almost $1,900 house. Is this unfeasible in our community to have that happen? So those lots go from generating not very much to generating quite a bit more. So we go back to our little revenue neutral rate right here, 25,000, and what happens to it? That would be wrong. Nope, that's right. It goes up to $29,221. So according to what we calculate on revenue neutral, because someone added on to their house and new houses were built, our revenue neutral rate is going to be a 15% increase. Okay. Most people don't categorize that as increases along the way, or the school district doesn't see it that way, because what's the mill levy been? 60. It's 60 mills. That's what we've been talking about. So, but this is our community now. That was our community last year. This is our community now. So if you're going to generate more money off those 60 mills that you're levying in your district, we have to report that along the way. That's where the fine part of this comes in. We know our valuation grows because of growth. It grows because of other reasons I'll get to here in a second, but growth is one of those things. So you can see what happens. And remember, it's an exaggeration in a small example of a sample that I'm showing you here. But nonetheless, the theories can go together with it. So we're going to take our 90 or 59 mills, we're going to reduce it one, and we're going to show you the numbers on that one. So what did the school board do? Decrease the levy. We always say that as we're decreasing taxes, we're coming in more tax friendly toward people than we were before. But you look at the growth that happened up in house number one, remember, it's valued $50,000 more. So instead of being dropped down to the 1863 like everybody else was, they're still 2202, lower than it was at 60. Absolutely. And then we have our new houses that are going to be valued at that $300,000. So that 59 mills generates those two. So where we come into play is down on that revenue neutral rate. When we look at that, the school board's going to say we're down 2% because we reduce that mill levy 2%. Revenue neutral is going to say you're 13% up. Does that make sense? So revenue neutral comes in and saying, okay, and this is where we kind of get in to what's reported in the Mercury, where our mill levy goes down and the percentage of taxes, because when you look at taxes to the taxpayer, if you're talking about all of the taxpayers within our circle of responsibility that we live in, did our tax amount go up? The amount of dollars went up even with the mill levy going down. Does that make sense? So that's what we're talking about. So if you got your if you got your revenue neutral hearing in this community along the way, you're going to see a request for an increase in revenue neutral, because we're asking for more dollars based on that, even though we're asking for less mills to be able to do that. Okay, 61, we're going to go the other way, and you can kind of see where the numbers go. So that's 17% increase on revenue neutral. Where I would always say, as a school district, I can own that one mill increase, because that's something we are doing. Sometimes it's the math, sometimes it's the formula, sometimes it's the necessity that makes you go up or down. And I think everybody wants to trend taxes in that direction. It's just be problematic on what you do sometimes. But showing you guys how that works on that level. So that's a growth example on 60 and 59 and 61 mills, and you can see the money difference between that. So now we're going to go back to our community, and we're going back to the default, except for the one house. Okay, I got one house that's still going to be valued at $350,000 to begin with. The other houses are going to be added for $300,000 along the way. Now, this is where it can kind of get messy. But remember, I'm giving you guys a exaggerated example. So we're going to say this community has been in place a couple years. Everything's good. You know, everybody bought their house for $300,000. They're kind of moving along. No one's moved. And then Fort Riley announces a transfer. And 3 of those houses go up for sale. And boy, that's a great community. That's a great place to live. They do 4th of July together. They have cookouts down in the cul-de-sac and those empty lots, and they shoot fireworks off the side. It's great. They love it. They love it. They love it. So supply and demand of that would say there's a shortage of houses in that area. So when they put those 3 houses up for sale, they sell real quick. And maybe they ask for $300,000, but they get offered $350,000 for those houses. Is that out of line in our community? No. I'm going to ask my realtor friend. No, right? I'm not crazy, am I? So we've had a lot of times. So So you guys have been great neighbors. We've had 13 great neighbors for a really long time, but now 3 of them are moving out. And what happens when similar houses sell in a comparable neighborhood for $50,000 more than the value of their houses are? What happens to the value of the other houses in the neighborhood?
Yeah, geez, Greg.
Well, Greg still got 50,000 more than everybody else. So now this doesn't always happen immediately and it doesn't happen as big of a jumps, but remember I'm kind of exaggerating because your county assessor, they have a process for what they do. Don't ask me to explain that process, but I know there's a lot of thought and everything that goes into it. But for my example, we're just going to say they catch it really quick because you only got 13 houses. So the they don't have a lot to do. So I'm pretty sure they're right on top of it. So they're going to increase everybody's house value up to $350,000, except for one house. Because remember, they added on for growth on their own. So it's a little bit higher than everybody else along the way. So you see those taxes go up because their home value is going up along the way. So our 60 mills that's staying the same for the school district and the values of those properties have gone up. The problem is people don't feel like their values have gone up, but in actuality, the market says the value of your property's gone up. Which, when we buy a house, generally, why do we buy houses? Buy houses because they appreciate, they grow in value. Someday, when you sell them off down, that you're hoping to get that difference, more equity, being able to produce that in your family. You want to see those things grow. The problem is when you see those things grow along the way and the value of your home comes up, what happens to your tax bill as well? That raises up too. So you're changing the value of your home through the market. So I'm going to call this one a market shift. So when the market shifts, you see the value and the taxes generated from that go up even higher. So I think I don't even add my 2 new houses. So I'm leaving all the houses the same. So you still have 13 houses. You have one that's valued $50,000 above that one. And you got the rest of them going up in value because someone sold that and your houses are all very comparable, living in the same place, same area. So our revenue neutral for the same mill levy that we're looking at along the way is going to generate about $5,000 more than it used to, or that's 20% in this little community. If we want to lower that mill rate, like we always say, that's mill rate, that's a lower, that's a good thing along the way, but their valuation is still higher, then we still get higher taxes along the way. And that revenue neutral rate, instead of a decrease for what we do with the mill levy, we're going to look at a 70% increase on our revenue neutral. Does that make sense? Okay, now we're going to get into 61. Does something similar, except it's an even bigger number. That's crazy stuff. So my exaggerated example. So now we're going to take our community and we're going to say the market, those same 3 houses go up for sale, but they don't sell very quickly. They're on the market for months and months and months and months, and they can't get that $300,000 that they're even asking, and they can't get that along the way, and they can't get that price until they drop it down. Someone offers them $250,000. They all lower their price, so we sell those 3 houses for $250,000. What happens to the other houses in that neighborhood? The value of their properties.
I would guess they go down.
They go down. So they potentially go down. Now, same thing as last time. So it doesn't always happen as quickly, doesn't always happen together like I'm going to show. I'm showing an exaggerated example. But when you see things sit empty along the way, it can decrease those property values in those comparable homes along the way. So we're going to say that's a $50,000 decrease in it. It's a pretty big hit on a home along the way. So you see that one house that's still $50,000 more. So they jump from 350 down to 300. Everybody else goes from 300 down to $250,000 houses. And you'll see that their tax rates, or the amount they pay, goes down considerably along the way. So if we look at our 60 mills and we see a decrease in the values of the properties within our area, we're not seeing flat, we're seeing a decrease of 5% on a revenue neutral if we have that happen. Even though I added 2 new houses. So I don't know if you guys saw that, but I added the 2 new houses, but I'm still generating less dollars along the way, which is how it works with revenue neutral. So we got the increase from that one, which basically evens out. We got 2 new houses. So that's a possibility too. So let's say we want to have that conversation about decreasing the mill there. You go even further, and our decrease of the mill levy is going to save 7% on the tax dollars in the same neighborhood because of a market adjustment in the negative direction. So then we go 61 and we increase the mill levy, is what we would see that as an increase to the mill levy along the way, because we went from 60 to 61, correct? But you look at the overall thing, how it works in a devalued market, and you're looking at 4% less than you're getting along the way. Here's our problem in our community is all of these things are going on at the same time. So you've got everything worth something along the way. You have market adjustments up and down within our community. You have new construction going in. I would love it if we could separate the new construction pieces or the new valuation when it goes from a lot to a house. If we could separate that out, but there's a way. They haven't told me they can separate that yet. I've asked about being able to do that. That can be a new business. It can be a lot of ways that comes into play, because knowing what the burden is on existing that are market driven along the way are what I think upset people more than anything. Because when the value of your home goes up, you didn't change anything. You didn't add on that $50,000 addition, because when you add on that $50,000, you kind of expect it, right? I don't think that surprises anybody. But when you didn't do anything and your neighbor sells the house for a lot more than what was on the market value, and your property value goes up and you end up having to pay more taxes along, that's the surprising piece. So what I'd ask people to do is, looking at it from a mill levy perspective, but also what happened to the value of your home, because we can also look at that depreciated market. If you're in that market, your tax bill looks better, correct? But what happens when it's time to sell your house again? You can be in trouble, and depending on how you financed your house, that's how people can get underwater too if a market drops too much. We have some markets in our community that have seen decreases. We've seen plenty of them that go up. So we got houses moving in all directions all over our community. So the way the Mercury's looked at it, and it's not wrong, it's not incorrect to say that, it's just looking at a totality. So when Mr. Hoyt asked me the question, can we show people what their taxes will do with a mill levy reduction? No, you can't, if you don't know exactly what happened with their valuation. So what I always try to direct people to do on this is look at what your value was last year that you were paying on your taxes on, and see if that tax increase, if the number is indeed going up, because some of them are going up, some of them are actually going down, depending on where they're at in that market market condition, that I would say, and what part's new construction. So how that all fits out is where we get into, and that's how revenue neutral kind of impacts that. Does that kind of make sense? So we have all those things, but I always ask people, look at the value. Did your value go up? Did the mill levy stay the same? What does that mean to the dollar amount? If your valuation went down along the way, what does that mean? Look at the mill levy rate. So we're going to see things differently on this, because for me, especially when you talk about growth, I'm not worried about generating more funds when I go from a lot to a house. I'm not. I don't see that as a tax increase along the way. I see that as a change of something that happened. I think you get most struggle with people, especially when you get the fixed income, because you buy your house at a certain level, but that value continues to go up, which is going to pay off for you someday, but it's not going to help your tax bill along the way. But if your tax bill goes down along the way, it's going to help you short term along the way as far as financially goes, but down the line, it's not going to be as feasible for you. So I just kind of wanted to go through that before we have the tax conversation, just because I thought it could help people. I don't know if people are listening along the way. It may be able to help you explain, when your neighbor gets that revenue neutral rate, and what does this mean? Well, look at these two things along the way, and this is kind of what it means to you. And generally, if it means it to you, you're generally in a similar neighborhood, similar values as well. Yours is probably doing something very similar to what your neighbors are doing, unless you just have a great expanse difference between the two properties that you have with your neighbors. So hopefully it's something that can help you with your neighbors along the way and help us understand revenue neutral a little better. Any questions on that part? I hope I didn't butcher it too awful bad. You got it, Christine? Okay. All right. I can go back to not being an econ teacher anymore and do all that fun stuff. So that's all I have for my report. And it was plenty long.
I just